soil.
The richer the soil, the less root mass required to support a given canopy mass.
And that's just because like the roots
Like
become
like
denser
aquaponics.
themselves.
Yeah, and it's just everything's there. They don't have to grow out as far searching for it because it's right there, right? And so,
But does that cause instability? We're being taught go lateral with your roots.
yes, and that's the issue to my mind is that in that overly rich soil, the root system can be really wimpy and still provide, but it's physically wimpy. It doesn't have the growth to maybe withstand higher winds or whatever. So I think
So getting a carbon content of 10% could really hurt a tree in the long run.
I'm not sure I
The
follow
soil
that.
content, we were told
Oh.
ideal is like 8%, but 10, 20 is, the more carbon you put in the soil, the better.
Yeah, for trees, I would not want it to be over 5%.
Oh.
And frankly, if you can get
Yeah.
a New Mexico soil to 5%,
Oh yeah, that's
if whatever you're growing, you've done great.
Yeah.
mine's at 1.
Yeah. And and trees can do that pretty well. So back to where does it get its nutrients from? It's getting some of them just from the residual soil. So our soils tend to have abundant phosphorus and potassium. You'll often see if you get a soil test done, it comes back none of that's needed. Micronutrients tend to be more the issue, the things that are needed in minute quantities but still needed. And that's where we end up seeing more of that chlorosis. Yeah, manganese, zinc, iron, boron.
Iron's a mineral, really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's all they talk about is throw iron in.
Yeah, well, and iron, the lack of iron will cause a leaf chlorosis because it's an essential part of the chlorophyll molecule, but so are zinc, manganese, and magnesium. And a shortage of any one of those four is going to potentially give you a very similar chlorosis. But iron is the one, I don't know why we focus on that more, but it does seem to be the one that we do focus on, and maybe because it's more commonly lacking. It is definitely affected by soil pH, and so a lot of times it's there but just not available. This is being a legume, it potentially has nodulated roots and is able to get its own nitrogen from the atmosphere. I say
What's this tree
potentially
called again?
because I'm not
That's
convinced
the,
that every urban
dog-
tiny spot
Red
of
vine,
soil
thank you.
has maintained the right microbes over time to nodulate with a legume from a different part of the country, right? And so there's a lot of ifs in there.
Can you like the way I know that you can inoculate a legume cover crop?
Mm-hmm.
Do you inoculate roots before you plant a legume? Or
I never have. I haven't planted that many legume trees. I would be more inclined if I was going to try to inoculate tree roots to try to inoculate them with a mycorrhizal fungi.
yeah, that's what I mean.
Yes.
Yeah.
As opposed to with legumes, it's a bacteria, not a fungi. It's a rhizobium bacteria.
Oh, now I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
And those apparently are a lot easier to propagate, package, sell, and still have them be viable.
Right.
There's a lot of question out there with the mycorrhizal inoculants as to whether or not the end product you're applying actually has viable mycorrhiza in it.
What makes this a legume?
Evolution. So what makes it a legume is
Or how
it
does
has,
that differentiate from?
yeah, it has pea-like fruit and a pea-like flower. And so a lot of times when people are doing taxonomy, they go by similarity of reproductive structures. And so,
I could grow a tree from this.
yes, assuming,
Well, there's some in there.
yep, yeah, I mean, you absolutely could grow a redbud out of that.
Kiddush.
Yeah. So it's a legume, again, kind of by evolutionary history. Good morning. But the things that you would key in on in the field to say, oh, that's a legume, is the flower and the fruit.
Okay.
It's an atypical legume in terms of leaf. So typically legumes are going to have a compound leaf. These have a simple leaf. And so that's one where if you were just going by the leaf and you didn't know that that heart-shaped leaf meant redbud, you would not necessarily say it's a legume.
That's a
I
pretty
know, that's what I was
leaf.
thinking.
So I guess this is probably who we have today to start with.
I think so.
All right, we'll go ahead and jump in. I think I've met all of you before. I'm Joran. Nice to see you all again. Beautiful morning. Carlos had asked me to kind of do a lab on tree problems, maintenance, symptoms, and problem solving. And so I don't know if you were able to print any of these out.
I was not able to,
Okay.
and I still
You'll
have
get
to
these
put
to
it up
you.
on Canvas.
Yeah, they'll get these to you one way or another. But when I thought about maintenance, I'm just going to kind of hit the highlights and then dive into some of the details so you can see kind of how I thought it through. There's some maintenance that's required. There's some maintenance that's recommended, and there's some maintenance that's completely optional. So, required, irrigation. It's a desert. Trees are big plants with lots of leaves. They need water. We gotta irrigate. The rare exceptions prove the rule. The rare exceptions are trees right on the river, trees right by the stream, or certain species like tree of heaven that are gonna grow anywhere regardless. But generally irrigation is gonna be a real first and foremost required maintenance issue. So how are you going to irrigate? That becomes a big issue. Roots are opportunistic and lazy. They're going to grow where things are easy to grow in, where they're finding what they want, and they're going to grow enough to support the canopy. And again, if it's a really rich soil environment, they don't need to grow as much to support the canopy. Irrigation is not once and done. I said I was going to go through the whole thing, but I'm already diving into the details, so that's how we're doing it. When we plant a tree, especially if it's a very small tree, maybe from a container, the roots are in an artificially small space. In nature, that tree, if grown from seed, would, at that height and caliber, would have a much wider root spread. It might have the same amount of root. It probably would have a little bit more because in the nursery they do tend to fertilize and water frequently, and so it's a rich soil environment and not as much root mass needed. But when we plant that, we have to water the existing roots where they are, or the tree dies of thirst before it gets established. And that goes against the general idea that, well, we want to water further away from the trunk. Yes, we do in time. But if we don't keep that tree alive until the roots get out there, it doesn't matter. So initially you want to water at the base, on the existing root ball, and adjacent, so that there is moisture in that adjacent soil for roots to get into. And then over time, you start spreading that irrigation with the growth of the tree. And then, so here's a little picture that I drew that just illustrates kind of the theoretical likely root zone compared to the canopy size. So whatever the diameter or the diameter of the whole canopy is, X, roots tend to be 2 to 5 times as wide. But it's not like they're in a uniform circle all the way around. They've grown way out over here and hardly at all over here because that's where the resources were. You know, and so it's quite variable.
Is that a problem?
For the tree, no.
Okay.
Because it's kind of self-optimizing as it grows. It's every part. This is one of the key things that I was thinking about the other day that I've often come back to, and it's not an original thought of mine, but it's a key thing about trees. They're modular. They have very simple units. They have roots and shoots. And shoots make leaves, and then that just repeats. More root, more shoot, more leaves, more root, more shoot. And so there are very few parts of the tree that alone are absolutely indispensable. Any individual root you can get rid of that root. It's when you get rid of too many that you begin to get into trouble, or too big of a root. So it's a dosage issue. Same with the canopy. If you know, we prune too hard, we're going to reduce the ability of the tree to feed itself, and it could begin to kind of starve to death. But we can certainly prune some, and the tree can respond fine. Back to the situation where, let's say we've planted a tree right on the edge of good root environment and complete hardscape. The root mass is definitely going to be offset, and biologically that's going to be okay. The problem may come when at some point the mass of the tree is big enough to catch wind and be unstable and whatnot, and it doesn't have a good support system on this side. One workshop I attended, the guy was saying that because of the mechanics of how that is laid out, so once you get off the core of the root flare, these roots are long and ropey and thin. So they're like cabling tied to the base here. And I could lay this thing down this way and not move these very much. They're not really holding against the tree moving that way. They're holding against the tree moving this way. This shoulder right here is what's keeping this tree from moving this way. These roots do add some, and my cousin in Tucson sent me a photo recently of her mom, my aunt, had some work done in the front yard, and they cut through roots on one side of the tree, very close to the tree, to lay a path. And yes, that one is leaning that way, but it also has all of its mass already that way.
So if you were going to push this tree over, which would be the easiest way?
It might be to this side because I don't have as much flare over here.
Crazy.
Maybe to this side, but these two edges are kind of catching that a bit.
Okay.
This tree would not be easy to push over.
Well, I said if.
Well, but compared to even that Chinese pistache right down there, that would push over easier because it does not have that good root flare right there on the surface. And it's only going in two directions, yeah. Yeah, and so roots, again, they're growing where they can and doing the best they can with what they got. And sometimes it's kind of insufficient in one area or whatever.
Are these roots under the macadam?
Very likely.
Under the what?
With the asphalt.
Sorry, that's the East Coast term.
Yeah.
What do you call
Here we call it asphalt.
Asphalt, sorry.
What did you call it?
Macadam.
Makeda.
Don't laugh.
I've never even heard that.
I didn't know how to pronounce it. I thought I was saying macadam.
I talk to my mom, and she's always saying the macadam.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yes, roots, what will happen is when you put any kind of an impermeable surface over the soil, there's an interface zone between the bottom of that layer and the top of the soil. There's this tiny microscopic gap where water will seep because it's the path of least resistance. Roots will follow that water right under the surface.
And they're not searching for water, they're following.
They're following water. It is my belief, and science may prove me wrong at some level, but I think roots cannot sense water on the other side of dry soil. They can't sense water on the other side of the PVC pipe. But what they can do is they'll grow where they can easily grow, and they'll follow the moisture that's there. I may have mentioned this before in the previous session, I don't remember, but roots will follow trenches of almost any kind, buried water, buried sewer, buried cable, buried gas lines, because the trench is easier to grow in. That's why they're following the trench. Now, if it happens to be a water and sewer line and they get big and they wrap around it and they crack or it has a leak anyways, yes, they'll exploit it. But they didn't get up to that pipe and pound their way into it, right? Oh, look, a little bit
There's
of
lots
water,
of
and they
people
get
that
into
think
that
that.
little bit of water, and then their growth is a real
too.
steady, inexorable push that can end up cracking stuff. All right, so that's
So roots are lazy.
roots are lazy.
I like that. I can remember that.
I mean, they're like any living organism. all of us are lazy in that we'll do the least we really need to get what we need to survive.
Right.
Right? I mean, honestly, some people are driven beyond and above, but
Yeah, so life is lazy.
life is lazy. Life is
It's a good thing.
yeah, I think it is. All right, and then most of your roots are going to be within 3 feet of the surface in almost any soil environment, with a few exceptions. You know, riverside, you may have some deeper roots that move down with a receding water table. But roots want 4 things. They want water, oxygen, nutrients, and a loose enough density that they can push their way through it. And all of that is more prevalent in the shallow soil. So back to this picture, what I've done, you can see this kind of a blue shaded area, and that's kind of my vision of the ideal watering zone in the ideal landscape where it's 360 resources all the way around. It's a donut. It's dry in the middle, and this is obviously after establishment.
Now, how old is that tree in your picture?
Anywhere between 5 and 50.
Oh, so we got time.
Yes. Yes.
I just put a bunch in. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm watering too close. I'm going crazy, and it's no, I got.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I talk about here. Placement of the emitters relative to the tree trunk matters. When the tree is first planted, you want to put them at the base to make sure that root ball doesn't dry out and die before it gets established. After 1 or 2 years, you take the emitters off the very base and start pushing them out a little bit.
So you tease the tree.
Yeah, and you draw the roots out because again they're following water, and so if you want the roots to grow that way, run irrigation that way.
And that's because the water loosens the soil? Or?
Well, it loosens the soil, but it's also a major resource that the tree
That's
is trying to
neat.
take in, and all of the mineral nutrients that come in through the soil come in through soil water. Right. So that's got to be happening. All right. Trees drink through millions of tiny, young, barkless rootlets, which are widely distributed out through the soil. So I think and speak in analogies, and sometimes I take the contrary position. So imagine, I'm a human, I drink through one orifice, right? So I might need, let's say, 8 cups of water a day. And if you give me water by spraying me down with a hose, 8 cups of water, and a few drops get in my mouth, that's not going to help. I'll be clean, but I'll be thirsty, right? And it's the opposite with trees. They don't have one mouth. You got to wet the whole body of the root system to get enough water to enough tiny mouths for it to get the volume it needs. Does that make sense?
So does water on the leaves, does that incorporate any? So watering leaves is just a complete waste of time.
It washes
The
off
bark
dust.
And the leaves, that's kind of like throwing 8 cups.
Yes.
Basically.
Yeah. Or pouring water on my head and trying to get enough out of the drips that come down my mustache, you know.
Do you think like maybe like a humid environment needs less water because less like transpiration maybe?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and that's a key point. So the amount of water a tree needs is based on how much it's losing. And in a dry environment, it's losing more at a given temperature because the air is drier.
So the humidity is not drinking it, it's just transpiring.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, you get into really humid climates, and the the leaf transpiration rate is not as high. Okay. So, broadly
Good
distribute the
point.
irrigation.
Thank you.
Oh yeah.
No, now it makes more sense, right? You got water everywhere, so it doesn't have to leave.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's not being sucked out of the leaf.
So you can
And
water
that's
it.
one of the real downsides of hardscape around trees, especially black macadam. Did I say that right?
Asphalt. You
Asphalt.
said it all wrong. Macadam.
Tarmac. Let's settle on
Tarmac. There you
tarmac.
go. How many words can we come up with?
Right? It's so first of all, it's a mineral which has the capacity to turn radiant light energy into heat energy, which heat rises. And then if it's black, it's absorbing even more of that energy, right? So what's happening is all around these trees, there's this plume of hot air coming up off the surface, and that's just sucking all the more water out of those leaves because it's hot, dry air. And so yeah, if we could measure the transpiration rate of a well-watered tree next to hot asphalt compared to the same tree out in a park setting, this one's going to be losing more water because it's in a thirstier air environment. If that kind of makes sense.
So could you visualize that with like thermal imaging?
Probably.
Oh.
Yeah. Or imaging that would show you like gas plume movements,
Yeah.
things like that. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. And there's probably people that have done and are doing that in research
Oh, I'm sure.
settings. Yeah.
There's lots of weird things going on.
So the next thing about irrigation is how often and how long. And those are really hard questions to definitively answer because there's so many variables in any given situation. But it's typically less often, but longer when you do than you might think. So I was talking to somebody yesterday down in Deming. I was doing working on a tree inventory down there, talking to one of the city management guys, and so they've got this row of trees in a broad kind of basin median that they can only water by flood irrigating with city water. And it takes 8 hours to push the water from the end that it comes out to the other end of that bed. And they're watering 4 days a week consecutively. And those trees are all really doing poorly because their roots are not getting enough oxygen. When they flood that, they flood it so hard, and then they do it again the next day, and then the next day, you know, and yeah.
Do they wait 6 weeks before the next one?
No,
Every week?
every week,
So it's flooding 4 days a week.
every week.
Wow.
8 hours a pop.
Yeah, that's a little much, I would.
That's a little much. And you know, it's interesting talking to maintenance folks in cities like that because they have no reason to already have known this, right? But they're put in charge of trees, and so their boss or the mayor or somebody says, well, that tree looks thirsty, give it more water. And maybe it looks thirsty because you've overwatered it.
Right.
But they don't have the training and background to know that, and so the boss is saying more water, so more water it is.
That's what people in gardening, not so much farming, because usually by the time you're a farmer, you know, but gardening, they're like, I water every single day, and it's like, that's the problem.
That's the problem.
Like, it's just as bad as not watering enough. You may as well save yourself some water.
Yeah, and then soil texture really matters. You might get by watering every day on a really sandy soil up in the
Right.
on the west side because that water drains away. On a clay soil, no.
And in gardening, I say use a moisture meter, but then of course you're not going to have a 2-foot moisture meter for
Yeah.
a tree.
Right. But still, we do use moisture meters some because really, if what's happening at 6 inches down is pretty important because a lot of the fine roots are actually pretty close to the surface. But yeah, it'd be nice to get some with probes that went down.
Yeah, because
2
like
feet.
maybe May you're watering twice a week, but in July maybe it's 5 days. You know, you gotta. It's relative to so many things. The
Yes,
size of
exactly.
The plant,
Well, isn't
And-
that what the
screwdriver's
screwdriver's
I think
for?
so.
It's just
Yeah.
kind of a mechanical versus a digital.
Right.
Yeah, and it can be really pretty useful because damp soil you can penetrate it with that screwdriver blade.
I just need a longer handle so I don't have to bend over.
Yeah, I should have brought it. I made one recently. I bought a 4-foot long 1/4 inch steel bar, bent a handle on it, and actually put a little wood handle on it, and then sharpened the tip of it. So now I've got a long probe that I could use for soil or to probe cavities in trees. But I haven't used it yet. So anyways. So I say, depending on tree species, age, soil type, soil root volume, type of irrigation system, mulch, and weather, and other factors, you're going to water somewhere between every 4 and 14 days in most cases. Well, that's still quite a huge range, right? And
Is that for established or new?
that would be for established.
Okay.
For new trees, and that's a really good point, for new trees, especially that first few months after planting, their root system has not grown out yet. It is still in that artificially small space and kind of needs to be watered like it's still in the nursery. So probably every other day, every third day.
So I took a Burnco backyard class, and they said 200 gallons a month for a new tree.
Okay.
That seems like a grip ton of water to be.
It's a lot of water. I will be straight up and tell you I never think in gallons because I don't actually know what that tree is using. So what I think in is coverage and depth and frequency, and then looking at the tree. And if I've been watering it every 4 days for 50 minutes and it still looks droopy and the soil feels dry, then I need to maybe either add another day in there or along. And so you have to kind of read the plant material to some degree. That's where it gets really frustrating working with clients when we install systems and we put in irrigation and they want us to fine tune that thing so they never have to think about it, right? But we don't know the future weather. And we don't really know how much water that tree is using, and there's a range between it's enough and it's too much, and anywhere in that range you're probably okay. And so people want this really precise answer to something that there's no precision about.
There's so many variables.
There's so many variables.
December, July.
Yeah. Oh, it's been particularly hot June.
Right.
Okay, then compared to last year, more water, you know. So it's difficult. All right. Sandy soils don't hold water. You got to irrigate them more often, but for shorter periods because they're not going to hold that water. Any excess water is simply going back down into the deeper soil. Clay soils, it's really easy to overwater them. I would frankly rather work with a sand soil than a clay soil. Even though clay soils have more nutrients and hold more water, they're so easy to get too wet. They're very easy to compact. They're very hard to remediate. All right, let's see. Newly planted trees watered more often. Water less early in the year and late in the season. I do recommend once a month in the dormant season giving it a good watering just to keep residual soil moisture present so that roots don't desiccate over the winter. Because this will actually happen if the soil, let me back up, water gets into roots because there's less water in the root than there is in the soil, and water is moving down a concentration gradient. And when the soil gets dry enough that the concentration gradient tips the other way, water will leave the roots. Again, through the rootlets that don't yet have bark, because that's the part that can absorb and release water. Once that root is old enough to have grown bark, it is no longer absorbing water, it's purely moving the water already absorbed further out up to the tree. So we want to keep a little residual moisture in the soil, and that also when early spring comes along and the tree is breaking dormancy, the leaf buds are basically going to communicate through hormone signals down to the root system that, hey, we're waking up, you know, and send water. Well, there better be water to send, all right? So, water once a month in the winter. I describe a little way that you can kind of pseudoscientifically determine how long to run a system on a given soil, a given system at a given volume on a given soil. You can more or less determine how much water it takes to penetrate down to a given depth. But you have to do a little bit of an experiment. You water, you wait a day, you see how deep it went, but you've watered for a set period of time, 1 hour, 20 minutes, whatever it is, and you've noted how high you turned on the system, or, you know, so you try to keep as much constant as you can so that you can replicate that. But then, yeah, you just probe that soil and say, okay, in an hour it went 6 inches. I guess I need to water 3 to 4 hours to get that depth. That's a really nice idea. I don't do it personally in my own yard. I I have a timer on all of my irrigation, just a little hand turn timer that maxes out at 2 hours. So I run 2 hours. And if it's been particularly hot and the trees look kind of thirsty, I'll run 4. And I'll do it when I think to do it. None of that's time, but I'm in my yard a lot and paying attention, right? So,
What are you growing?
oh gosh. I've got a lot of vegetable beds that are on irrigation, and then I've got, in the backyard, 2 cherries, 2 pear, 1 pear, 2 peach, 1 Asian persimmon that's young, a couple of figs that are trying to make good, and that's most. And then out front, I've got 6 fully dwarfing apple trees and 2 plums, and another peach and another cherry.
So you have a fruit orchard.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I have a
Not
high
shade
water
trees.
bill. Not shade trees. In fact, I had 2 big shade elms in my front yard that were doing marvelously once I started irrigating the fruit trees in between them.
Oh, yeah.
So they came down this year because the fruit trees, even though I was watering a lot, the fruit trees were like, we're kind of thirsty, and the elms are like, oh. And I'm
And
like,
that-
no.
You recognize that thirst by what?
Just a lack of turgor in the leaves is kind of a short-term turgor. So the leaves are droopy. Turgor is when there's internal water pressure in something that kind of inflates it. And so leaves that have a lot of water are kind of puffed up with it. And when they start losing water, they kind of wilt a little bit. That's a short-term way to determine, today, how is the status of that tree. More long-term is like, what's the density of leaves in the canopy? When the tree is getting more stressed in a long chronic way, it tends to have a less dense canopy. Yeah.
So for those fruit trees, how could you tell that it was watered, not necessarily like they weren't getting enough sun? Well, if that makes sense.
That's a good question. So in my case, even with the elm trees on either side, they were getting 8 to 10 hours of sunlight a day just because of where they are. So I know it's not that.
Okay.
And that's just by location.
Yeah.
um,
What would a symptom of not getting enough sunlight like?
Not getting enough sunlight, the first thing that I would probably note would be that there's a leaning towards the brightest part of the sky. So over time, as it's growing, it's reaching. And I actually see that with one of my cherry trees that's right up against the north side of the house. It's kind of, but it's also a tree that, when I look at it, I note that it has poor turgor and a not very dense canopy, and I've just watered, and the peach tree next to it looks fine. What's going on with that tree, and the reason I'm probably taking it out this year, is it is grafted to a fully dwarfing cherry rootstock, which is something that's kind of new in the market. I think there's some graft incompatibility, or at least rootstock to scion incompatibility. That root system is not supplying enough, and that tree is not doing well. And the stem of the graft part is about this big, and as soon as the rootstock, as soon as we get into the graft, it gets bigger. Which you'll see sometimes either the graft is bigger at the base than the stem, or vice versa. When it's the vice versa, it kind of describes a choke point in the overall water uptake scheme of the tree, right? So that's one where, even though I know based on the other trees around that's on the same system, it should be getting enough water, it's not. So then what's going on? All right.
Besides cutting down trees, what can you do for that? I mean,
In that case, one thing I could try would be a much more aggressive pruning of the canopy to keep it smaller, so that root system can supply enough.
yeah, okay.
But when I do that, I'm also cutting out the food factories that keep the thing going, right? So it's like, and I'm also, like roots, inherently lazy. And if I have to do that much work to keep that tree alive, then that's not the tree I need there.
Yeah.
Out it comes.
Wrong tree, wrong.
Wrong tree in the wrong place. Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to have to work that hard. You know, I mean, these things grow on their own. They have for millions of years. You know, if it's that much work for me to try to grow them there, then that's not the right thing to be doing.
What are you going to replace it with?
Oddly enough, I think I'm going to move one of my figs from the backyard to the front. So here's why I say oddly enough. Figs like a warm environment. And the north side of the house is the coolest part of that microclimate. But the trees I had, the 2 figs I have in the backyard, one's been in ground for 5 years now, and it's still coming up off the root every year. It's not surviving, even though it's surrounded by concrete and cinder block walls, and it should be in a hot spot. And then I planted another one in a sort of a raised bed that I made right up against the south side of my house, but I used a raised bed soil from a local supplier, and that stuff was toxic. Everything I tried to grow in it stunted severely. That fig is very stunted. I thought maybe 2 years in it would have mellowed. No. So I've got that fig tree is surrounded by daylilies. They're this tall and wimpy, and they get water. You know, I mean, it's that particular soil chemistry. So I'm going to move that fig from that warm hot spot to a cold spot. The reason being, last year, or was it now 2 years ago, I got to prune some fig trees. They were 2 of the biggest, most vigorous fig trees that I've seen, and both of them were on the north side of 2-story buildings. Now, what they had that my environment doesn't have is that they were condos with small, high-walled courtyards in that backyard. So it was very wind protected and a lot of thermal mass. But the fig tree is struggling where it is. The cherry tree is struggling where it is. What have I got to lose?
So 5 years is not too long in the ground to move?
That one's only been in the ground for 1 year.
Oh, okay,
The other
okay.
one is staying, and this year I'm gonna not be as lazy, and I'm gonna try to protect the above ground stem.
Can you tell us who you bought your soil from? Or turn the camera off?
Well, it was from Soillutions.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was their
Well,
specific
they're right next door. I've been
raised
there a
bed.
million times.
Yeah, and I used to really like their material, and then it sold to new ownership, and they tried to kind of make it a bigger operation and whatnot, and I think quality suffered.
I wonder if does it have any manure? You think it has some herbicides in it? Some broccoli?
There's definitely manure in there, so there could be some herbicide issues. I don't know if this guy still works there. I hate to say it, but I basically just cut ties with him. $175 a cubic yard, and it's killing everything I put in
Yeah,
it.
that's horrible.
And it wasn't killing it; it was just not helping it grow. So it was a special recipe for raised beds that
Right.
he had done all this stuff to, and who knows. But I do know from talking to somebody yesterday that I was working with who has over the years bought stuff from them. Even way back in the day, they knew there was contaminants in some of their stuff because of the manure that they use, because of some of the wood products that they use that are treated wood, things like this. And I'm not faulting them. They're trying to do a good thing, recycling organic matter, and we just contaminate everything we come in touch with. And so the organic matter is contaminated. It's probably usually still better than not adding organic matter, but then sometimes it isn't.
Yeah, manure, more and more, the hay is
So, and
got
this
the
is
broadleaf in it.
an interesting thing. Sorry, we're getting all
Right.
digressed, but these are all
Well, our
very
group
interesting
is
points.
interested in soil.
Yeah, and soil is where it all is made or broken. If things aren't good below ground, things are not good above ground. But there is a particular herbicide that is commonly used in grain production. So wheat, barley, oats, any grain, they will use aminopyralid. An aminopyralid is a very effective broadleaf herbicide. Years ago, back in the 90s, University of Washington was making compost and selling it, and they were using feedstock from all kinds of different things, including straw left over from commercial grain production. And they got reports back from people that bought the compost and used it. Hey, my plants are dying. Well, research showed that aminopyralid does not break down in the digestive tract. It does not break down in the composting. And so even though it's completely decomposed compost and ready to use, it still has this strong dose of a broadleaf herbicide in it. To the extent, 2 years ago, I planted a tomato in a pot in my mom's backyard, and several years prior to that, I had brought her some straw to use as mulch, and there was still a little bit of that left. I thought, I'll just throw some of the straw on top of it. Came back a couple of weeks later, herbicide damage. Just from the straw sitting on top of the soil. That straw was, at that point, 8 years old.
Wow.
And it still had an impact. Now, it didn't kill the plant, and I got rid of the straw, and it grew out of it. But it was like, whoa, that stuff has persistence. So yeah, more and more I try to just make a lot of my own compost.
And you can like, let's say you want to buy from somewhere, you can go get a small amount, put it in a pot, and then put some pinto beans in it.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
Beans
then
are great.
within like 2 weeks, if the leaves are all mangled and not
Yep.
looking right, you know that it's an
Yeah.
issue.
And they call that a bioassay.
Bioacid. Right?
And that's a great way to, and yeah, any peas or beans that germinate real easy, they're kind of foolproof in a way, right?
Right.
And if they're not doing well, like you said, the leaves get all gnarled up, and herbicide damage, some of it can be very distinctive. So, all right.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
I know there's not like a definitive answer, but like generally how long can you get away with a tree being in the ground and then moving it? Like Tim was kind of asking, like, 5 years.
Yeah. So to some degree, that's going to depend on how much you're willing to spend to move it. I would say,
So if you take enough dirt, you can move any tree?
or none.
Okay.
If you use like the blaster.
Yeah, you can bare root the tree during its dormant period with an air spade, and then move a lot more root system. There's a tree. Let's walk. There's a tree in this park that we did that with.
I'm thinking of like
Um,
like a lot of willingness to give, but
yeah, that's going to be really hard.
past like a year or
I would say probably 2 years in
Okay.
would be where I'd start to question whether it was worth the effort to do that, or just start over with a new tree in the right place.
This is last year at my farm, someone planted all the trees to
Okay.
leaf.
Yeah.
So they
If
were
that was
wondering
last
if
year,
they could move.
what I would do is I would wait until late winter, near the end of dormancy. If they're farmers or have friends who are farmers, they'll have access to either digging forks or broad forks. Okay, so the key is that you want to move as much of the root system as possible. But if you leave it in dirt, now you've got a 500-pound mass of dirt that's going to break anyways and tear roots when you take it. So you do with digging forks and broad forks what we did with an air spade. You work that soil carefully away from the roots, and at some point you just go ahead and cut them because you're not going to get every little bit. But you try to get more than just that core at the base. And if you do it in dormancy, you lift up, or you dig them up and you replant them quickly. It is kind of open heart surgery, but it can work really well.
So, 3 questions.
Yes.
What is dormancy?
Dormancy is when the deciduous trees are not in leaf. So it's going to be basically November-ish to.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
kept hearing a bell. I didn't know who it was.
Silly Tim.
You know, November-ish to April-ish.
That was real.
And it's going to vary a little bit for different trees.
She didn't slow down a bit.
Desert willow
She
has
didn't want
Those
to.
1940s horns on
and
cars.
ash. But dormancy is basically that winter time
Wah,
frame
wah, wah.
when the deciduous trees have
Did you
dropped
realize
over seed
that
and
the
are
big
not
discussion post?
actively.
It was funny, I was talking
Metabolizing
about mulch,
well,
mulch, mulch. I keep saying mulch,
How
mulch,
long
mulch,
can you
and
have
I'm
the
like,
open
which is
heart
like
surgery
Beetlejuice
go
and
on?
you
If
save
you've
your
got
family
10
over
people
mulch.
digging.
Oh no!
Um,
That's like a grip ton of
It's
time
really
to move
random,
the tree.
Right. So,
It's a great movie.
again, there's some variables. The cooler and more humid it is,
Okay, good.
the bigger that window of time. But I would not want to take more than. I would not want that exposed root system sitting out more than a couple hours. A few
Hours, not days.
Hours, not days.
Okay.
Now, if it's going to be out of the ground for days, then what you need to do
Another bike.
is you need
Is this a
to
bike you like?
Yeah.
you need to keep the root system moist
Okay.
and shaded. And so, how you do that? There's different ways. There's a technique for municipal plantings and volunteer plantings where they bare root trees. But what they'll do is once they're bare rooted, they dip them in a slurry, either a very muddy slurry or a hydrogel slurry, to basically coat all of the roots with water retaining material, and that gives them a little bit more of a window. But you know, if you buy, let's say, bare root trees from an online nursery, they're going to be bare root for days.
Yeah.
But their roots are wrapped and moist and not just shaded but dark. And so you can hold them for a while, but they've been prepared all along for that. I think when you're field digging something, I personally would want to try to get that tree back in the ground the same day.
What's the hole that you put it into look like? Because these are going to be a big tree, right?
I'm thinking, I mean, they were all pretty small, like 1 or 2 inch,
They probably haven't grown a whole lot in 1 year.
hopefully.
So I would be looking at maybe taking a root mass diameter of about 3 feet, so 1.5 feet on either side, and go ahead and cut. And then what you're digging is a 3 foot 2 inch hole, not very deep, just deep enough to settle it in and have the root crown at grade. And then you backfill with native soil, the same soil that came out, no amendments.
Okay.
Water it in really, really well, and additionally break up the soil around it so that the roots can easily get out into that soil. And I don't know if we talked about that last time about planting, but instead of digging a really, really wide hole and putting all the dirt back in, just dig a big enough hole and using that digging fork or a shovel, break up the soil adjacent to the hole without removing it and putting it back. Just crack it open a bunch, and that will enable those roots to easily get outside of the planting.
And it's better for the soil too, because you're not breaking up all the
Yes.
layers. You're just
Yes.
introducing
And you're not introducing as much air. That's one of the reasons tillage is so bad for soils. A, it breaks up soil structure, but it also introduces so much oxygen that organic matter burns out of that soil all the faster.
If you can pick the tree up,
Mhm.
would you bare root it as well, or would you just? If it's a young enough tree, most of mine I can.
Well, if I can get a big enough
Yeah.
soil ball and then move it without that soil ball fracturing. Because that soil ball fractures, it's likely to tear roots.
Okay.
And then you're losing root mass. And so I would rather try to move it bare. We did that for a client last year. She had planted a young apricot tree, a little bitty tree, on top of the placenta from her twins. And then 4 years in, she's like, I'm selling the house and moving. I want to take the tree and the placenta. So we convinced her, first of all, that the placenta was in the tree, so we didn't have to try to find it specifically.
Yeah, that's way gone.
Right, it's, yeah.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. But yeah, I bare rooted it, just carefully working that soil around the roots and, gently kind of tugging it up and working it and then cutting it. And it weighed 1.5 pounds when it was ready to move.
Oh, okay.
You know, yeah, we did that also with a big 2-inch caliper elm tree last year, year and a half ago now. Planted way up in the foothills, and so we bought a ball and burlap at the nursery. We're just right across the railroad tracks from Plant World, so we drove it over to the shop, and I had 2 guys helping me. We slid it into a big bucket of water, a big tub of water, cut off the fabric, the wire, and then I just massaged that soil till I got all of the soil off the root system, and then we wrapped it in wet burlap and ran it up to the foothills and planted. And the tree's doing fine. What I've noticed, and we'll talk about it when we get to the tree, if I ever get it moving. What I've seen when I've done bare rooting of trees, and I've done more of it actually using a drill and a tree spade than I've personally done. But remember, what's absorbing water are those tiny, tiny young roots that don't have bark. And they break really easy. And so the idea with an air spade is, hey, I can blow the soil off the root system without damaging the root system. And that's largely true until I get to the very small rootlets. They're going to be blown all to smithereens. So even though I'm moving a large root mass, I'm moving it without its essential water absorbing mouths, and it's got to regrow those. And so what I've seen is that the first season after the bare root transplanting, the trees that I was able to keep an eye on they leafed out very sparsely. The density of the canopy was very low, but there was no dieback. The next year the density was better. The next year the density was better. So way over here, there's a crabapple tree that when I was city forester, we got a notice from somebody, I don't remember if it was the public or the crew, just the maintenance crew, but somebody had gone out to a young crabapple and had completely stripped the bark of the whole trunk.
Oh no.
Well, that kills the tree, right? So we took it out, and the city has a nursery down on Rio Grande Boulevard that was planted at this point probably 15, 16 years ago. And it was planted very densely. And we didn't really have a good way to harvest a lot of those trees. And so they just sat there growing and growing and growing. And they got these, close to 4-inch caliper trunks, and we just had a small tree spade. So there's no way with a small tree spade that we're gonna get enough root mass. So we bare rooted some. We used a trencher and cut a big box around them into the soil, and then just worked the edge of the box towards the center. Took about 3 hours of air spading to clear the root ball. Then we picked it up, put it in a big tub of water, and drove it off to plant it. So this little crabapple straight ahead of us, sitting there kind of on its own, that was the replant.
Wow.
We pulled it out of the nursery. It actually spent most of the day driving around. It was the last one. We did like 3 trees that day, and it was the last one. So it kind of suffered the most. And yeah, the first year after planting, that canopy was really sparse. But again, there wasn't any dieback. It had canopy out to the edges. It just wasn't dense anywhere. Look at it today. Now granted, this is like 6 or 7 years in since we did that.
It's doing great.
This thing is just rocking and rolling. It's loving life. It's probably doubled its trunk diameter since we put it in there. The other thing that's really cool about bare rooting is that you can see the entire root structure, And you can be really sure you're planting to the correct depth because it's all visible. There's nothing hidden by dirt. So yeah, it can work, and the key is to gently take as much root as you can, to do it quickly when it's cool, ideally when it's dormant. The first time that I heard about this idea of bare root planting kind of bigger trees at least, it was at a conference, and the guy that was speaking said, yeah, we're doing this in South Dakota in the middle of summer, 90-degree weather and single-digit humidity, and we're not losing trees. Yeah, I think that I would never expect that to be the typical result. I mean, this guy is one of the preeminent researchers, practitioners, and educators in arboriculture in the world. All right, so he's done everything from the grunt work to a PhD, and it's all been about trees. So it's like, okay. His name is Dr. Ball, Dr. John Ball. If you ever go to a Think Trees conference where he's speaking, he will be the one that everyone loves to listen to because he's just really dynamic and he's funny and he pitches things, complex ideas at a level that's real easy to understand. He's a great speaker. So anyways, it works real well. Back to, and let's move to where everybody's in the shade. That will be much friendlier. Okay. There's some other stuff that you can read when you get it, just kind of more detail. I have a point in here that a given tree needs a certain volume of water to grow well. We just don't know what that volume is. We don't really have a good way to analyze that. What's that?
Only the trees know.
Only the trees know, and it's going to vary, right? Today I need more, it's hotter. Yesterday it was cloudy, I didn't need as much, But so here's one thing that one way I try to help clients understand irrigation is, again, the tree needs a certain volume of water. What determines the volume of water available to that tree is the volume of soil in its root zone that is actually holding water. What determines the volume of soil actually holding water is the surface area receiving direct irrigation that's allowed to infiltrate. Right? So let's say that the tree needs 100 gallons of water this week. And if I put 100 gallons in one spot, all the rest of this root system is not able to access that water. And that amount of root system cannot process that much water. I got to spread that water out. I got to cover surface area, and I got to cover surface area in such a way that the water doesn't just run down the surface, right? So that's where drip irrigation is really nice. Drip tubing is great for trees because it's such a slow drip that the water doesn't build up the mass and tendency to sheet flow. It actually soaks in for your climate. And you don't have to worry as much about uneven surfaces. Water is the laziest of all. It only goes downhill, right? And so I might have a 20 by 20 root zone available for this tree, but because of how the surface lays and I'm flood irrigating from the hose, only 10% of it actually gets wetted. You'll see that a lot if you go out to where there are trees in medians or other kinds of, especially like a crusher fine soil surface or even bare soil. If you go out right after they've irrigated, you'll see here's where the water went. That's the wet soil. Here's where it didn't go. And drip tubing gets away from that problem because it's such a slow emission and you can spread that tubing everywhere. Okay.
So you do all your trees on one line?
I do because it's not actually that many trees. So, and I say I do, it's not exactly
10
true.
trees.
I've got the front trees all on one.
Okay.
I've got the back trees all on one. Now the back trees and the garden beds are all on the same system. So I have valved every garden bed and every tree. and I can decide that day who's getting water and who isn't, by which valves I turn on. And it's a little bit of a pain in the ass. It's not automated, but again, it allows me to pay more. It makes me pay more attention, which I think is only good. So I mentioned the inline drip tubing, and I've included a picture of what the front end of a simple hose bib inline drip tubing setup looks like. So here's the hose bib. This is off the back of my house. It goes into a 4-way splitter here because I've got 2 garden hoses, and this runs up to the swamp cooler.
Quite the octopus you have.
Right? But then right here, this line goes into first a small brass backflow preventer.
Okay.
Required. You don't want potentially contaminated water flowing backwards into the municipal system. Then I've got my timer. Then I've got a couple of these flexible hose ends just so I can turn things easy and not have things bind. Then I have a filter. This is a 200 micron Y filter. It is specifically designed for drip irrigation. Mine has a clean out valve at the bottom. So every now and then I'll open that valve and push water out to clean out the filter. But so it goes through this filter and then it goes into a pressure reducer. I'm running at 12 PSI. I will never blow up my drip system because I'm running at 12 PSI. We put something similar to this in at the extension office when I was the county director down there. And it's county property, so we had them run the water out to the beds and we had drip tubing, and they only reduced the pressure to 40 and we just kept blowing stuff apart. So definitely reduce it.
So
But-
you're using city water?
Yeah.
And
That's what it
that's
is.
all okay? There's,
Yeah.
kind of chlorinated.
It is better than no water at all.
So you don't pre-treat it.
I don't. I mean, I'd love to be able to let it off gas to at least get the chlorine out. But then I'd have to have a big open tank to have that happen. You know,
It'll
it's just,
evaporate anyway.
yeah. And so, again, it's like you've seen trees growing on really less than ideal water and doing okay. Again, less than ideal water is way better than no water. So, all right. So that's irrigation. Optional but strongly recommended maintenance. Starts with structural pruning,
So is only required maintenance irrigation?
in my mind. You will find many people who will disagree. What I love to say is if you have 3 experts in the same space at the same time, you will have at least 4 opinions.
That's what I've heard a lot in this program.
Yeah.
Okay.
And to some degree, that's actually a good thing. So years ago, this relates to structural pruning. As when I was a young county agent, young in terms of being a little bit green still, I put on a pruning workshop. But because I thought, well, I've read a bit and I know a bit, but I want some true expertise, I brought in other experts. I brought in 3 other folks: George Duda, Nick Kuhn, who was city forester at the time, and Brian Seward, who is kind of the dean of arboriculture in this part of the world. And we were all looking at the same trees and discussing where we would prune and and we weren't always agreeing. And I got an email after the event was over from one of the participants, and she said the best thing I got out of that was hearing you guys disagree, because it just freed me up to go ahead and do something.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think that's a really valid point. But structural pruning. This is the pruning that a young tree receives that highlights the best possible architecture that tree is presenting by reducing the weak parts and the things we call defects. Again, the analogy in this case is education. If I have a young child and I send them to a good preschool and a good elementary school and a good high school, and by the time they're 20, I say, hey, you want to go to college? And they're like, yeah, I'm ready. Now, if I wait till they're 20 and I say, look, we call these words. They're made of letters. No, that's not going to work, right? So that structural pruning is early education to the tree on giving it the most architecturally strong form, it can grow for what it is. And so there's kind of 5 steps. The first is determining which is going to be your central leader and maintaining that dominant central leader. Now, let's look at the difference between this little young oak tree that's shooting up real nice and tall here. I think that's an oak. From here I can't quite tell. It might be a sycamore. Anyways, whatever that is, shooting up nice and tall compared to this crabapple. Crabapple is never going to get much bigger than this. And it doesn't like to grow a central leader. And the main reason for strong form is that it reduces risk. And there's not a lot of risk if branches fall out of a small tree. So I'm not as fussed about that aspect of structure on a small tree as I would be on this tree. This tree, I want it to get tall before it starts branching out. It's going to be stronger. So, develop and maintain a dominant central leader. Identify the lowest branch in the permanent crown. And then understand that everything below that is temporary. So, this tree. Here's the lowest branch in the permanent crown. When it was young, it had branches lower. And had they been allowed to grow, it would have been branching really low. That's not necessarily bad from the tree's perspective, at least early on, because the tree, again, it's maximizing its potential to catch light by growing broadly and widely. It's not until the weakness of that growth leads to failure that it becomes a problem to the tree and to the people maintaining the tree.
What kind of tree is that?
This is an elm. I think this, there's a bunch of elm hybrids, and honestly, I'm not quite sure which one it is. It might be Emerald Sunshine, but I don't really know. But upwards to get to that light, and side branches tend to be much smaller and less of the mass, and there's this just strong tendency. When we take that same tree and put it out in the open, it's like, hey, I can get light in all directions, so I'm going to grow in all directions.
What I want.
And again, up until the point where failure happens, that's all good for the tree. It's got more leaves feeding growth. But we look at it and we say, okay, but because we put you in a situation where you didn't have to deal with the evolutionary pressures that you are programmed to deal with, we've got to provide that influence.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. All right. So, so we identify the lowest branch, and then anything below that, we keep it reduced or we eliminate it. But ideally, if it's a young tree, we just reduce it. We cut it back. What I like to do is any of those temporary branches, the first year I'm working that tree, I'll cut them in half. I'll just blindly cut halfway through the stem to shorten them. That also reduces their growth potential, but it leaves leaf area making sugars close to the low trunk, close to the roots. There is so analogies, I love analogies. The analogy is oil wells. So leaves are like oil wells, they're generating energy. But the oil is not used at the well, right? You gotta move it to a refinery and then out to gas stations, and every foot you have to move that oil takes a little bit of the energy represented by that oil. The same is true with sugars made through photosynthesis. The farther that sugar travels to where it's going to be used, the less of that energy is left in it. The more of it is used up. And so if I have leaves close to the trunk and low down close to the root system, they're very efficiently feeding growth of that part of the tree. And then, so the first year I cut them in half, the next year I cut them in half again, third year I take them off. Sometimes with some of them I'll go like, this temporary branch is already big enough that I don't want it to get any wider at all. I'm going to take it off now completely, and then reduce the other ones.
So again, what year is a young tree? 3, 5?
I would say anything between about a 1-year-old. So structural pruning could start as early as 1 year and could last as long as 20, depending on how much you're doing, how much the tree needs. Some trees, bur oaks, sycamores, you may never have to do any structural pruning other than removing low branches because they have a tendency to grow really strong upright form. Other things, elm, ash, locust, they have what's called a decurrent growth habit. They like to branch out. And again, in a forest setting, that's fine because a lot of that is contained. But they're the ones that we really worry more about doing good structural pruning.
Can you add sucrose just into the ground to kind of supplement the trees after?
No, but what that might do is actually stimulate some of the microbial life in the soil that might benefit the tree roots.
I don't think I've seen anyone
Yeah.
sell something like that.
Yeah, because that really is, again, the analogy. I'm eating food that's being digested and then distributed. If somebody just throws food at me, that doesn't help. I've got to take it internally and distribute it internally.
But it's giving it to the microbes, right?
Some of it is, but a lot of that sugar is used for the growth of the root itself and for every metabolic function that
Since
those
it's
cells
outside.
have. So yeah, a lot of it, and some of it leaks out and does feed the microbes.
Okay.
But the bulk of it is used internally.
I use like blackstrap molasses to brew tea with to feed my microbes.
Yeah,
And it has a lot of
Do you
minerals.
do a
that's a pretty
concentrated?
common one.
Well, I'll add roughly like a quarter cup to a 5-gallon bucket that I'm bubbling. That's a whole nother conversation. But I mean, it's giving the carbohydrates to the microbiology.
Yeah. See,
Yeah, that's
Right.
kickstarting your compost.
Right.
But I mean,
Right.
if it's outside, it can't get into the roots. If it does, it's going to the wrong place.
Well, if it's outside, it's not going to get into the roots, but by enhancing, basically you're adding organic matter to the soil.
Right.
And that's just enhancing the whole soil ecosystem, which in turn gets more nutrient molecules cycling, and it makes a healthier root environment.
Got it. Okay.
Again, to a point, trees don't need as rich of a soil as garden vegetables or farm vegetables.
Right.
And so with most landscape trees, if they never got deliberately fertilized, they'd be fine. Especially if they're growing in turf that does get fertilized. They're getting all they need and more from what the turf didn't take up. But that's usually just a lot of nitrogen. It's usually not the micronutrients that are also essential. All right. So then we're also spacing main branches. This has not been done on this tree, so that's actually fairly helpful. Let me see if I can get my laser pointer working here. All right, you see the green dot on the low stem?
Yeah.
So we're moving up, moving up, moving up. We get right into here. We've got 4 branches. Well, we've got a main stem and 3 side branches, all really tight in there. That's a really tight spacing for 3 lateral branches. If it were me, I would prune off the top one and the bottom one and leave the center one.
Which one would you consider the top one?
Well, okay, so just in this little cluster right here,
Oh yeah.
the one the light is on now is the one I would keep. The one below it and the one above it, I would take out.
Okay.
And I would kind of apply that treatment throughout the tree. The earlier you make a pruning cut, the smaller the pruning cut, the easier it is for the tree to deal with the wound and the less leaf area you've lost. So, if you can anticipate, if that pruning could have been done when the tree was only 2 foot taller than that, it would have been ideal. I would still do it if it were my tree. Unfortunately, the city has like 6 guys to take care of somewhere between 25,000 and 30,000 trees across more than 300 parks.
And then there they are.
Well, and they're not even the tree guys.
Yeah, they probably overwater.
Right.
Just kidding.
And then city guys, one guy holds the shovel, right? And one guy manages.
Don't say that.
Okay, I'm sorry. I take it back. I take it back.
Struck a chord with Tim.
It's kind of true. I know. I'm sad to say, but it is kind of true.
So Jordan, with an older tree like this, where it would be like more enduring,
Yes,
taking
and
them
so
out?
that's where
Great
pruning
question.
dosage kind of comes in, and this idea, very roughly, 20% is as much living tissue as you should prune out in one season. And so, structural pruning is the kind of thing that if it's your tree in your backyard and you can prune it 2 or 3 times a year, you can just detail it to your heart's content. When we would plant trees in the park, we would, and so each time you can go light. When we would plant trees in the park, knowing the number of trees and parks and people, we would try to do heavy structural pruning at planting, because that might actually be the last time we ever touch that tree. And so that matters a little bit. If the tree is growing strong and it's young, you can push that dosage up. If I've got a young tree with a codominant stem structure and a really weak union, I might take out half the tree and be done with that problem. Otherwise, I'm going to take out part of one of those stems, and still I'm going to have to manage that over time to allow the other one to become the dominant stem and this one to recede into less significance. So it kind of depends on a lot of factors, like all of
Would
this.
you start at the top and open it up there, or start at the bottom?
If I
If
were
you had
just
to do this one,
if I was just approaching this tree cold right now, I would start at the top because that's where my central leader is. So my first moves would be to select which one of those many shoots I want to continue as the central leader, and to remove or reduce everything competing with it. Once I had established the central leader, then I would start, in this case, I would not worry about lowest branch because that's already been established, and I would start looking at bad angles of attachment. So the more, the tighter the union angle and the more of a V it is, the weaker it is. A U-shaped angle is very strong, a V angle is not. And so when I was looking at this tree and deciding which of the major structural branches to keep and which to remove, a lot of that decision might be made on how well anchored that branch is, but it would also be made on what's above and below it to kind of achieve a crown that the side branches are spaced out along that main stem. They don't all come out at one place.
Is it harder a tree that grows like this up?
No, it's actually easier.
Oh, is it?
Because you have
Yeah.
the central main stem.
Yeah,
So
yeah. A
it's
lot of
not
it is kind of already
Right.
presenting. Now, elms do tend to have a base habit, and it's really easy for them to get squirrely. This one hasn't. There is one more aspect to structural pruning which I would add into that recommended but not necessary, and that's the structural pruning we do on older trees. And largely what that involves is reducing the length and the weight of long horizontal branches, because they're the ones most likely to fail under their own weight. And if I take a little weight out of the tip, I really reduce that lever arm force on that branch. And so that's also considered part of structural pruning. Okay, in terms of when to prune, let me go back here to find my place.
Wait, I thought you had 4 and 5 to go. Or did I miss the determine
Yeah.
leader, lowest branches, spacing?
Right, so spacing the main branches, and again, that's looking at this cluster of 3 side branches right here. Let's reduce that to 1. Anything that's like shooting through the canopy at a bad angle or rubbing and crossing might be one that I would eliminate. And then just trying to, if I've got, a big branch coming out here, I don't necessarily want another big branch coming out here. I'd rather have it here. And so when I've got options, kind of trying to pick, keeping the one that gives me a little bit better spacing, but also balancing that with angle of attachment. If the best spaced branch has a really bad angle of attachment, I'm going to take the less well spaced branch with the stronger angle
This
of
one's
attachment.
splitting. Did you take one of those?
Oh man, thank you I didn't even notice that.
I
This
learned
is
last
why you
time.
want to. This is why you want to establish one central leader early in the life of the tree. This had 2 main leaders with a very tight angle of attachment And this is exactly what textbooks will predict is going to happen. This trunk is splitting, and at this point, short of bracing it with through rods, steel rods bolted through, there's nothing you can do about that. What if we had caught it when it was just beginning, heavily reducing one side of the canopy to subordinate that one and make the other one more dominant, would have worked. But this horse left the barn months ago.
Wow. How many years do you think it's been in the making?
It's been in the making since the tallest point on the tree was here.
Oh, so forever.
Yeah. Yeah. It's since those two branches grew as tiny sprigs, that was when the best result could have happened by taking care of the problem.
So the wind's gonna knock one of those off or the other. Is that the end of the tree?
Functionally, yes, in this kind of a landscape, because it's going to introduce now, and already has, frankly, there's a huge amount of exposed wood inside that union that is going to be decaying.
Wow.
It's not that it might decay. It's going to be decaying. Decay fungi, the spores are everywhere. And as soon as you've got exposed wood sitting out for a while, they're going to find it and they're going to start growing. And so this tree has because of that one issue, the functional life of this tree in the landscape has probably been reduced by 75%.
Oh, wow. Wow.
It should not be allowed to become a big tree because then it's going to be very dangerous.
Wow.
Because either side is going to be able to split off. Now there's no direct targets. When we think about risk, we think about targets. A bench, a picnic table, that is a permanent target. And even if there's nobody on it, the table itself could be damaged. This tree doesn't really have any permanent targets, but we got kids playing soccer out here all the time. This is a heavily used park.
Keep the kids out.
There may well be people that are just hanging out in the shade of this tree because that shade was already taken, right? And so there is some target potential.
So like years ago, like in a perfect world, even before it was planted, or somebody comes around and monitoring and putting in work orders.
Yep.
But that's not happening because they're understaffed.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. There's the premier urban forestry programs in the world, in the country, are probably Austin and Fort Collins. They spend, I think in Austin it's about $28 per capita per year on tree care. In Fort Collins, it's somewhere, I'm gonna say 16-ish, I think. Albuquerque, it's just over $2 per capita.
Oh, wow.
And we have more trees in more parks than either one of those two cities.
Wow.
And we are so underfunding their maintenance. In the case of Fort Collins, I give a lot of credit to how they set up their city government. Yeah, we may have to scoot in a minute. The city government in Fort Collins has a strong city manager, weak mayor model. So the mayor has a 2-year term, and he's largely a political figurehead. Mm-hmm. And it's the permanent city manager who's been there through many administrations who's actually running things. And so they make a plan 30 years ago, and they're still working that plan. Now, Albuquerque, we have a strong mayor
And it's a rich
model.
city.
And what happens in any city department, as soon as the mayor changes, there may be a wholesale change. We're not doing that anymore. We're doing this. And everyone drops that and we go do this. And so there's no continuity of planning. There, and I think that's a big piece of it. And then just funding. All right.
You've done it, Tim?
Yeah.
So
Clock if anyone has
to
it.
finish off real quickly, spacing the main branches.
Well,
And
I have
then-
a meeting, so I'm just gonna hop on once I'm done with it.
If we're part of keeping that central leader as the dominant leader is anytime we've got a side shoot that's really growing vigorously, it has the potential to catch up. We want to reduce that or potentially eliminate it. Reduction cuts, a specific type of pruning cut. On a branch like this, a reduction cut might be pruning it right here to take the tip out, but leaving this side branch. So a reduction cut is always cutting back to a side branch. So you've reduced length, you've taken out a lot of material, but ideally your side branch is somewhere between a third and a half the size of what you took off. And then that just kind of, it slows that growth down, it reorients it, and it eliminates a potential competitor for the top leader. Okay. Pruning, time of year. Summer is great. Trees are metabolically active. You've made a wound, they're going to have to do two things to try to seal that wound. They're going to infuse the wood underneath the cut with anti-decay chemistry, and then they're going to grow wound wood over that. Both of those things require that the tree be metabolically active, right? And so in the summer, if the tree is not drought stressed, it's gone through its spring growth push, and now it's in a maintenance phase. It's ideally set up to address wounds at that point. So you get the quickest wound wood growth, and you get the least advance of decay into that cut surface because the tree can quickly respond. So I really like summer pruning. Late winter is also a good time to prune right before dormancy breaks. And that's typically when we'll prune fruit trees, mostly because with fruit trees we're making usually a lot of smaller cuts. Smaller cuts are easier for the tree to repair, and it's a lot easier for us to see the structure when it's dormant, when all the leaves are off. So that end of dormancy is not a bad time. The times I try to avoid pruning is right after growth starts in the spring. The tree has taken its invested energy and it's put it into new growth, and it hasn't kind of recouped that investment yet. And so I like to just let it kind of get through that early spring strong growth phase and then work on it. And then also at the beginning of dormancy is a bad time to prune, because when we make a pruning cut, we have opened a door through the protective wall of the tree, and the tree is going to sleep. And it's not going to address that wound, that open door, until it wakes up. And so some research that I saw at a conference, this guy, researcher in Germany, he did this. He made pruning cuts at different times of year, let the tree grow for a couple years, and then split it down the middle and laid it open to see like how far discoloration advanced from decay getting into the wound. And basically what he found was that early dormancy pruning, you have the greatest advance of decay and the slowest wound wood growth. So the two things the tree can do, it does the least well. And that's interesting, because we still run into a lot of people who have somewhere heard the myth that fall is the time to prune. And I'm not really sure where that started, but there's a lot of tree care myths out there that are just that. And that's
So
one of them.
in the summer, when it's in like stasis, you prefer,
Yes.
and after it's been asleep for the winter,
And it's
before
about
it's-
to wake up, but
before
hasn't
it's about to-
woken up yet.
Okay.
Yeah. And honestly, with that, I mean, depending on how many fruit trees you're pruning, you might be starting in December. You might be starting in January, because you might have acres and acres of pruning to do. If you're doing just a few trees, I try to wait a little bit later. Late February, early March is kind of a sweet spot. And then there's an old farmer's, and it may be a myth, but an old farmer's saying of first to bloom, last to prune. And based on that, if I've got a mixed orchard, I'm going to prune my apples and pears first, because they're going to bloom later. And I'm going to catch my peaches and apricots and other stone fruits that bloom early. I'm going to try to catch them right before bloom. And so and I'm not sure how important that little old farmer saying is.
So the palm fruits you do early, and the stone you do after them.
Yes, because the stone fruits bloom first. And it's kind of, for some reason, somebody long ago thought that made sense. And I have yet to find anybody say it doesn't, or explain to me why it does. So
But you
take
follow
it,
it.
take it with a big grain of salt. All right, back to recommended maintenance, mulching. Again,
haven't
it's
heard
not
that, have we?
necessary, but it sure is helpful.
I've heard
Mulch. I saw you
Yes,
comment.
and then so it's like structural pruning. It's not required, but it's really recommended. And that's how I feel about mulch. And I will mulch trees till the day I die.
Well, I've noticed most of the trees in this park too have mulch.
Right. Now I can tell you when we plant them, we put mulch. We put a 6-foot mulch ring, but depending on your turf type, it's going to be a couple of months to maybe 2 years before it's full of grass again.
Yeah.
If you're in Bermuda, forget it. It's coming back in tomorrow.
Is there a particular tree mulch that you like?
Yes, arborist chips. So that's I read that term recently for something that I've been trying to describe forever. Arborist chips are just the wood chips out of the back of a tree truck, where they whatever they were working on that day, some of it living, some of it dead, some of it pine, some of it oak, whatever it was. It's a mix of different stuff, and I think that's really good. So I prefer a mulch like that that's going to have ideally some amount of green tissue that's going to break down quick and feed nitrogen into the soil, but also a lot of high carbon wood that's going to be resilient and stay there for a while. You know, kind of second tier, I would put pecan shell. I would put a high carbon wood chip mixed with a compost. You'll sometimes see that sold as forest floor mulch. My resistance there is back to the question of compost and what's in the compost, and you know, and what was the wood source. And then next tier down, I would put bark. The advantage of bark is that it's really slow to break down. The disadvantage is it's really slow to break down. And it doesn't have much of a nutrient load, and so it's not building soil well. But it's also not as bad as rock, which does cool the soil and limit water loss from the soil, but it adds heat stress to the canopy and pulls water. And then the bottom of mulching, which frankly I would prefer bare dirt to any of these mulches, would be crusher fines and chipped up tires, which are now sold as mulch.
Might be something.
AstroTurf, one of the worst things you can put around trees. AstroTurf will get hotter than gravel.
Wow.
And it will also leach petrochemical byproducts into the soil. And the last time I was talking to a client who had put AstroTurf in a yard around a big tree and the tree was suffering, he was describing what I hadn't realized. They took out 6 inches of the top of the soil to lay a compacted base course to lay the AstroTurf. So again, they took out probably the most important part of the root system in terms of fine roots absorbing water near the surface. And what they didn't take out, they covered in rock and compacted, and then, you know, so it's like, no wonder your tree is tanking, you know.
Get a plastic tree.
Get a plastic tree.
Right,
yes.
there you go.
Plastic wrap, plastic tree, you're all set.
So again, I really like organic mulches. I prefer, you know, and so this is an interesting question because people will ask me, what's your favorite mulch? And it depends on what I'm mulching. If I'm mulching annual vegetable plants, I will not use wood chips. It's okay, but at the end of the season, I got to clear them off, because if I work all of that high carbon wood into the soil, I'm going to starve that soil for nitrogen until the microbes break that stuff down. What I like for vegetables is spoiled alfalfa hay. It's 16% nitrogen. It's going to break down in the season. Whatever doesn't break down, I can just turn into the soil, and it's going to finish breaking down.
I've heard that attracts pest insects though. That alfalfa hay.
I've never had a problem with pest insects due to alfalfa hay, at least that I could make the correlation.
Okay.
Straw is okay depending on your source. Again, straw is what's left over after a grain harvest. Did they use aminopyralid in that grain crop to keep the weeds down? In which case the straw is contaminated. The other thing with straw is that it has almost no nitrogen. It's just carbon. So it's a fine mulch, but it's not going to really add to the soil the way that the difference between straw and hay, and even a grass hay, if it was chemical free, would be a great mulch. Fresh yard clippings that haven't been treated, great vegetable mulch. Because they also that green represents nitrogen that's going to be available in the soil once that stuff breaks down.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the straw, you'll be picking out grass shoots out of your bed.
Yes, yeah. So it kind of makes its own cover crop,
Right.
sorta.
Right.
Maybe not intentional.
But I emailed once. I bought some straw from Tractor Supply, and I emailed the company, and they said, yeah, sometimes we do treat, sometimes we don't treat. It depends on the season. So I think I got lucky that batch because it was already on the ground. My plants did fine, but it could have gone the other way.
Yeah. And so back to spoiled alfalfa hay. If they didn't get it off the field in time and it rained and it starts to mold, well, shit, I'm going to put it on the ground anyways.
Right.
And they're going to sell it to me cheaper because it's now lower quality. So if I can source moldy alfalfa hay, that's to me great vegetable.
Like partly
mulch.
broken down already.
Yeah.
It's already started.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
where to keep it going.
Right.
Yeah.
Clever.
All right, back to mulches. Weed barrier fabrics do not really have any place in the landscape, in my opinion. What you've all seen is that they don't actually stop weeds because there'll be mulch under rocks. There's dust and weed seeds that grow that blow in on top of the mulch, on top of the weed barrier, and then germinate and grow. And I've never seen a rock mulch that didn't become covered in weeds unless it was being routinely hit with herbicides, in which case there's probably tree damage. So no fabrics, that's one reason why. Another reason why is that they kind of wear out and break down and surface, and you'll get these really ugly landscapes with all these flaps of fabric out in the rock, and that's just aesthetically unpleasing. I also think that they are synthetic materials, and they don't break down, and they represent, in my mind, a synthetic membrane barrier between any organic matter that might get on the surface and its ability to decay and incorporate into the soil. And that's what builds soil, is organic matter incorporating into the soil through decay. So it hinders soil development. And then finally, it can be fairly imperfectly permeable. A lot of these products are permeable, but just two examples. One was just a little trial that a fellow that used to be the state horticultural specialist, he had Marisa Thompson's position years ago. He just did a little experiment where he just laid out some of these fabrics and dripped water on them. And if there was any slope at all, more of the water would just sheet down the surface, the top surface, than to soak through. Because again, water's lazy, it's going to follow the path of least resistance, which in this case was down the surface as opposed to slowly infiltrating through. Some of it did, but most of it went down the surface. And I've seen that also in a landscape setting years ago. I was called out to look at a tree in a backyard that was a young Chinese pistache, had been planted by a local nursery, and they had put drip irrigation to it, but they had fabric and crusher fines. And so I look at the tree and I tell the lady right away, well, this tree is dying of thirst. And and she says, well, so they set up this irrigation system for me, and when I would run it, I would get this 10-foot wide wet spot. And so I kept reducing it because that was, and I pulled back the fabric and the soil underneath was completely dry. Crusher fine has a lot of very, very, very fine particles, clay-sized particles in it. That's why it'll set up real tight. Clay, especially fine particle clay, will suck water really hard and hold on to that water. So all that applied water was just moving in the clay in the crusher fines, and none of it was penetrating through the fabric and into the soil. What they could have done and should have done is put the tubing, the drip irrigation, whatever it was, below the fabric, or not have used fabric and crusher fines and used a wood chip mulch, and things would have been very different. All right, And then I mentioned in the part about mulching herbicides. Again, in rock landscapes, I see a lot of herbicide damage, and a lot of it is from products that give you long-term weed control. A lot of them have soil active components, and if you read the fine print on the label, it'll often tell you not to apply it within 2 times the canopy distance. Roots can go 2 to 5 times the canopy distance, and so even at 2 times, you're risking something. But I would say homeowners are the worst, but frankly, I see it often in professional commercial operators as well. They don't read and follow the damn label. And that actually is the law. You are technically breaking the law if you don't follow the label, but they don't read it. And so they're spraying right up to the base of the tree. And well, you get what you get. And then finally, in the world of maintenance, things that I consider to be pretty reasonably optional. Maybe recommended, maybe not, depends on the tree. Mature tree pruning. If a mature tree has reasonably good structure, why do I need to touch it? It doesn't need my help. Trees don't need routine pruning just because. So on a mature tree, I'm going to be looking at, are there overextended branches that are very horizontal and heavy and likely to break, so I can take some weight out of the tips. That'll help that. I might be looking at anything that's broken, things like that, obvious issues and problems. Maybe it's a mature tree and I've just identified a really tight crotch angle that hasn't cracked yet. Good, I can start to reduce one of those sides to eliminate that potential down the line. But there's often a lot less pruning in a mature tree than people think there is. And my mantra has been that the best amount of pruning is the least that accomplishes a legitimate goal. What is the legitimate goal? So, maybe it's clearance. We've got these really low branches, and we've had 6 complaints from the public about kids snagging their hair on the low branch. All right, yeah, on that elm tree right down there. So clearance pruning might be a legitimate pruning goal for that tree.
Damn.
But again, what's the least I can take out to accomplish the goal?
Break out the shaver.
Pest control, I think, is often optional. If trees were that easy for pests to kill, we wouldn't have it.
Good.
Trees can take a fair amount of damage, especially to their leaves. Leaves, as important as they are, they feed the tree. They're absolutely important. They're also about the most expendable part of the tree. Any individual given leaf is completely expendable. Even the entire canopy, the tree can lose the entire canopy in the middle of the season through maybe a weather event. Or I had an apple tree that grasshoppers got to, and they left only a few partial leaves in the entire canopy.
Wow.
By fall, it had fully leafed out again. Because a healthy tree is storing a lot of reserve carbohydrates in wood, and as soon as there's a need, it can spend that reserve. It's when the tree is barely managing to grow year after year that bank account gets so thin that it's harder to recover. So pest control. Again, we're back to this 20% idea, similar to the pruning dosage. In the approach called integrated pest management, we think about an action threshold, which is how much damage to that tree is enough to trigger me doing something about it. And it's about 20%. When I'm losing 20% leaf area, I might consider taking some sort of action. And so a lot of times what we'll see with leaf feeding insects is that, they might have hit some leaves really heavy, but if you try to sum up the amount of leaf loss throughout the canopy, you might be at 1%. It's a non-issue. Now, it might be an aesthetic issue, and that's a different thing. I think as homeowners, we can define away a lot of our problems by accepting less than perfect aesthetics. As long as the tree is still fundamentally healthy, it's okay. That's also true with diseases that attack the leaves. There's a suite of diseases collectively known as leaf spot that cause little dead spots in the leaves. A number of different species do it. What the literature from the university says is if the tree gets defoliated 2 years in a row, consider taking action. All right, I've got 5% of this canopy today showing leaf spot. I do not have a problem. I'm gonna go find something to do. It's not this, right?
You have a different problem.
A different problem. There's other problems out there, I'm sure. Diseases that attack the inner part of the tree, or insects that attack the inner part of the tree, are much more damaging. So I may have mentioned this term before. I coined the term the living rind to describe the sapwood, the cambium, and the phloem. In the trunk, those 3 layers, which are all stuck right together, that's where the living tissue of the tree is. And anything that gets into that living rind can cause real problems. So some of our vascular diseases attack that way. Phytophthora, Cytospora, Botrispharia, things like that. And they can, the hard thing about them is that there's usually not a lot of symptomology before the tree is massively in trouble. And there's usually nothing to do about it anyways. We don't have the chemistry to reverse that. Bark beetles are an insect that does that kind of damage. The way they feed, they basically just kill that entire living rind, and the tree has nowhere left to go. And I threw in here at the very end this picture that's the disease triangle. So this, I was taught this when I was a county extension agent listening to the state plant pathologist describing how diseases happen in landscapes and plants. So for a disease outbreak to occur, there's 3 things that have to be present simultaneously. You have to have a susceptible host plant. Okay, some plants are susceptible to some diseases, and that's just a fact. You also have to have the pathogen organism present in the environment. They are. There's a disease called Cytospora. It's a vascular system attacking fungus. When I was with Extension, I was told repeatedly that I could scrape the bark on any tree in town and send them the flakes, and they could plate out Cytospora. It's everywhere all the time. It's an airborne spore. So then we have to, the third thing that makes it happen is the environment. The environmental conditions have to disfavor the host plant and favor the disease organism, and then you're going to get disease. Now, to reverse the disease, you have to fix whatever it is that's the problem. Maybe it's like, you know, that plant is always disease ridden in this environment. Let's quit trying to grow those.
Right.
You know, hey,
But I
problem
like them.
solved.
I like them.
Getting rid of the pathogen organism. It doesn't happen. You're not going to. They're out there. So can you change the environmental conditions? And so a lot of times with like something like Cytospora, it's a drought stress that initiates the problem. The tree becomes weakened, it breaks somewhere, the disease gets into the exposed wood, and the tree can't fight it off. So with diseases, the whole point of when I learned this was that, like, let's say it's a fungal disease. There's a lot of fungicides out there. And I can spray fungicides on the diseased tree every day, all day, but unless I have changed the environmental conditions that are favoring the pathogen, I am not going to reverse that problem. And ironically, if I can change those environmental conditions quickly and strongly enough, that will probably reverse the problem. And I may not need to apply fungicides. That takes us to the end of the prepared statements. I'm not sure where we are on time.
They're well over.
Well over. Okay, good. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank
Yes,
you.
of course.
That was
That would
amazing.
clap if it wasn't, would be weird.
It's all right.